I thank you for the introductions, and I'd say welcome to the conversation. And I mean that tonight. I want this to be a conversation. If I'm up here for hour and a half speaking, I'll lose my voice, and you'll be bored. And so I think that there's a lot of good things we want to go through, and each of you likely brings with specific questions to this workshop, some specific challenges. You're looking for some takeaways as you leave here. It might be something that's occurred in previous years. It might be a current challenge. It might be something that you anticipate down the line. I'm confident that you'll have an opportunity to explore all those questions and much more throughout these next 3 days. And if it's not done at a session, you'll have your break time, your networking. I think one of the most enriching parts of workshops is not only having exchange with speakers and presentations, but you're among your peers and you can bounce off ideas and find out the challenges of what they're facing and how they are handling those. For our agenda, we're going to be talking about, I kind of divide election coverage into different elements of coverage, and that's actually my book too, is kind of the elements of election coverage. We'll be talking about the campaign coverage from start to finish. Some of the things talking about is getting organized, having a calendar, having a team effort, introducing yourself to candidates. And again, most of this information on the summary on the PowerPoints should all be in your handouts too. Then introducing the candidates. They're the main characters in the election. So talk about how to introduce the candidates to the electorate. And then talking a little bit about election night, post-election coverage, so that when you're reporting, it's just not votes and quotes, but how you can offer some interpretation, some analysis to the elections. And then finally, throughout all steps of election coverage, in fact, I'm a firm believer in anything in newspapers, is explain yourself. I wrote a weekly column at Red Wing that talked about everything, for if people write a letter, catch you on the street, give you a call, but all the different things that you do at a newspaper that you take for granted, and you may have policies, you may have do's and don'ts, but you rarely explain it to your readers, or you don't do it enough. And I think there's ample opportunity, ample items in election coverage that you can really use that. So again, as I say, let's have a some hopefully you're all coming here tonight with wanting to take away something on organizing coverage. And what's your, maybe a few questions. What are your biggest challenges? Anybody? What's one thing you hope to take away from these 3 days? Anybody?
I'd say making coverage relevant.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Making coverage relevant to our readers in a way that they want to know a little bit more.
Okay.
I'd say freshness. Freshness.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know the protocol.
Okay, well, we'll have ample opportunity to explore all of those, I hope. So I'm going to get right into it. An individual comes into your office announcing his or her candidacy. It might be for local, state, or national office. How do you handle the story? On a different front, have you ever had candidates say that the stories profiling, their campaigns are biased? Or how about campaign managers saying, hey, the letter of the editor for my candidate did not get nearly the display that my opponent's letter of the editor got? How about candidates who say, what about the photo requests? Somebody calls up and says, can you come and take this photo? Candidates routinely ask you to take photos, and how do you handle that? Do you have a policy? Do you have guidelines? Does your newspaper endorse candidates? Why or why not? Have you ever had the conversation? Many of you have likely faced these challenges and a variety of other circumstances that could prompt a lengthy discussion. We could probably spend the next hour and a half just going over horror stories or challenges that you face in a normal election season. It all points to, I think, underscores the premise of these 3-day workshop in that election coverage from start to finish is one of the most exhausting tasks that you undertake in your newsroom. And that being said, I'm a firm believer that your coverage, if planned step by step, can be fulfilling on many fronts. I think comprehensive coverage spells out the ground rules of what you're doing for candidates and readers alike. Comprehensive coverage can open up opportunities for political advertising. Comprehensive coverage can lay the groundwork for robust discussion of issues important in your community with the ultimate goal of energizing and strengthening down-home democracy, which is the title of this workshop. I think comprehensive coverage on all fronts can deliver dividends for your staff as well as for your readers and your community. If you haven't guessed, I do have a particular passion for election coverage. And because I think that electing individuals is really at the foundation of democracy. I mean, we are electing people, and it's connecting your local citizenry with your governing bodies. And no medium understands or is in a better position to produce that election coverage than community newspapers. I'm a firm believer in that. You have multiple avenues to do so, from the print editions to the web, and you live and breathe the community, and you really are in the best spot to do that. Election coverage also, though, more so than I think any other area of coverage in your newspaper, is scrutinized by readers. Every aspect, from candidate profiles, the letters of the editor, to endorsements, to how you coverage of debates. I mean, it's all put under a microscope. And if you have an active editorial page in terms of with political coverage and endorsements, it's even another challenge for you, because people just don't differentiate the news coverage from an editorial page. So I would say, I'm a firm believer that underlying all your coverage, if you walk away with, if anything, to be fair and to be consistent. The enormity of the task really demands that your staffs plan all aspects of coverage. We'll spend a fair amount of time on that this evening, talking about planning. The better organized your coverage, your better your organization, you'll just be more prepared for solid coverage and to handle the unexpected circumstances that always arise in elections. Addressing elements of coverage, it's really assigning responsibilities, it's setting tasks for when things should be done, and it's how to package things. It's even a greater challenge if you're in the non-daily, because you have fewer editions to put the information, you have to really think ahead. If readers want to interact and respond to coverage, you have to look at those deadlines closely. But I would argue that no matter the size of your publication or the frequency of your publication, the principles, the foundation of outstanding election coverage are the same. So how many here are in your first election? Anybody? 5 years in the business. You're all veterans. I'm hoping that you walk away tonight, that everybody walks away with something. If it's the first timer, you're learning some new ideas. If you've been in the business for a while, it's looking at what you've done and saying, okay, can we tweak this? What are we doing good? What can we maybe improve upon? But everybody, if you can, one thing is with any workshop you go to, it can be overwhelming too. I mean, I'm one presenter, there can be a half a dozen, 8 presenters, and you can walk away and be pretty overwhelming. Say, here are all these great things, and in some operations, you're doing everything, or very small staffs. And so I think it's important to take baby steps, think through, synthesize this stuff, go back to your operations, and say, if I could pick out 1, 2, or 3 things, a handful of things that I want to work on for this year's election coverage, I think that's important, and that's the way to go. Again, besides the remarks that presenters give, you have a lot of opportunity to find out from your peers on what's working and what's not working. Election coverage, consumes hundreds and thousands of column inches, and so you have to also, as you go through, besides presenting that, presenting it in a readable and understandable way. And gone are the days that you can just throw everything on a page and have a sea of gray and have people expect to read it. So I think that you have to, as you think through everything, I think other sessions will draw on that too this weekend, is graphics and photos and using the web and how you can best utilize those to make your coverage fresh, compelling, interesting to readers. I approach coverage, again, like I say, talking about the elements of coverage, and letters to the editor, voter guides, endorsements, covering school referendums. I think is kind of a special one, tricky one in election coverage. You can kind of divide through and how on the different aspects of election coverage. This evening, I'm going to go through 3 that I think are really kind of the elements of any solid reporting. And number 1, you must lay the foundation for coverage, and by introducing the characters involved, introducing the candidates. Number 2, coverage must be in a continuum as you're leading your readers through a natural sequence of events. And then number 3, once the main event, the election, is over, is be ready to provide substantive follow-up, some analysis, some insight on what does this all mean? What the day after? Why did people vote the way they voted? We're a month into 2014. But obviously, I'm not familiar with all the states, but in Missouri, you have municipal elections. I mean, you're well underway with the municipal spring elections and doing coverage. But I'd also argue that it's not too early to sit down next month and talk about August primary elections, if that's when they are, or it's August, September, whenever they may be in your states, or the November general election. You cannot be organized enough and to just look through all the races, and whether it's from, as you decide on local races, or if you go down up the ladder to legislative or congressional, see which races you're going to cover, how you're going to cover them, but have that initial brainstorming session. The cynics will say election cycle never ends, and and in some aspects it doesn't, but I do think that by planning and organizing, you can have substantive, worthwhile, interesting coverage to your readers. And many of you are on your way to coverage. I went through some of the newspapers that had registered for this event and some of the clips that Scott sent me, and you are doing it. I mean, the Branson Tri-Lake Times wrote the tax lacks support, a non-scientific poll which says that it's going to be tough. It might be a tough haul to renew the tourism community enhancement tax. And then there's accompanying column by the publisher that said promoters have a lot of work to do. In the St. Joseph News Press column by Steve Boer, breaking down the city primary election, kind of almost handicapped the election, talked about his perspective of it, the lay of the land, and what some of the different races. The Sikeston Standard Democrat, races are set for April 8th elections. I mean, I think a lot of papers have had deadlines are set, here are the candidates. Columbia Daily Tribune, Columbia City Council candidates gets a civic lesson. It was an orientation that candidates had from the city department heads. A little different angle, different perspective. From Illinois, the Northwest Herald, it said a McHenry County Board election referendum and ballot. It really gave a primer. Voters were going to vote now whether the county chair should be elected by the county board members or by the voters. And it was a real nice Q&A kind of primer on it. Another one from Illinois, the Edwardsville Intelligencer, county seeks election judges. Just kind of a nice feature, but saying, hey, elections are around the corner, we need judges. Here are the duties, here are the qualifications, the responsibilities. Colorado, the Villager newspaper, Dodie Mulling run for Secretary of State. He was talking about a county commissioner. I think she had been barely in office for a year or so when I was contemplating running for Secretary of State. So, I mean, the stories are out there. They range from news to spot news to feature to commentary, and they all present challenges. But in the end, if you're prepared to address them, you will be just at more solid coverage all along the way. So I'm going to go through the three elements tonight, and actually we're going to start in the middle of the continuum of coverage. We're looking at the campaign from start to finish. Then we'll go back to introducing the candidates, and then we will wrap up with kind of the conclusion or the votes and what they mean. So again, talking about the planning your aspects of coverage, stressing fairness, consistency, the guidelines, responsibilities, setting dates, explaining policies, and sometimes it's not only setting policies and explaining policies to your readers, but maybe within your own organization. You may feel strongly you should endorse candidates, and there might be a sharp division whether you should do that. So some of these policies, you have to spend as much time internally as externally. So how many of you have written your first story for spring elections? Well, several of you have. I just rattled through many of them. How many have had a newsroom meeting on election coverage for planning November elections? Anybody? Seems like far way off, but no one. Okay. Have you announced to your readers, which seats are up for the spring elections? You probably likely have all done that. Have you asked the incumbents? I'm not sure, depending on the state when your filing deadlines are, have you asked which incumbents are ready to seek re-election if the filing deadline hasn't approached yet? Election coverage, is again a big job. The number of races range from local to state to federal, and you have limited resources. So obviously, this workshop is all about local races, and that's what you should really be focusing on is on the local races. That should be your priority. But don't be afraid also to review the whole spectrum of races and give attention. And there's some that may be, that should be on your radar. And as you do that, again, explaining to your readers. Early on in the election season, you should say, here's what we're covering, here's what we're not covering, here's why. Or there are ways, and we'll touch on some of that even if you don't do full bore coverage, if you don't have the resources for a race higher up the ladder, there are other ways you can give it some attention, some coverage without devoting your local resources to it. But on I'd encourage, have that brainstorming session early, and other questions. How many, if you polled your newsroom staff, how many people know the dates of precinct caucuses or endorsing conventions for candidates? If an individual walks into your office to announce his or her candidacy, who handles the story? What questions are asked? How is the story displayed? Is it the same for challengers and incumbents? Is it page one? Is it inside? Do you use a photo? If you haven't had a comprehensive brainstorming session yet on planning elections, again, I'd say that's a primary thing to do early. And then draw up that preliminary to-do list, a to-do checklist. Start the conversation, and other questions and ideas are certain to surface in that discussion. And don't be afraid to include individuals from outside your newsroom. I think back in the days when I was at the Red Wing, I think, well, we're the cornerstone on the. We know the news, we know how to handle it, we know how to cover it with elections or anything. That's our job. Well, that's obviously very short-sighted. And actually, if you look in your newsroom, your newspaper family, from news to circulation to management to carriers to to composition. There's a whole variety of individuals that can really add a flavor and some interesting insight maybe on elections. And then also, don't be afraid to write a column, write an editorial to your readers and say, elections are coming up. What issues are important to you? There may be something totally out there that you haven't thought about at all, and engage them. And at the end, you'll make the decisions. It'll be clear. You'll decide how to plan out that coverage. But engaging them is just one more way that they feel a part of your newspaper, a part of the community, and working on that coverage. So I want to, I'm a firm believer kind of in election calendars, of having kind of your internal calendar and your external calendar. And I'd say if you look on your handouts on page 4 through 7 in your package there, I just put through a whole, a sample of a master calendar, but I think you can go as easily on page 4, just having some kind of a simple chart to put together. Have the calendar in front of you, and have, what is the element, or what is the duty, what is the to-do list, and what's the deadline, what's the staff responsibility, and what are the notes. Now, you can go, I'm not suggesting that each and every single thing, but look at the big things and have this, and today, you can just have you can have a file on your computer that everybody can share and look at, and you can have that constant reminder, and especially as you get into the heat of election season, you can look and check those to-dos. I always define newsrooms as organized chaos, and I think as you get into that in the election season, you have to remember that, especially if you're in a community where you have heavy duty, a lot of races, a lot of activity, you've still got your full bore of regular news coverage you have to do. So you cannot forget about that. But look at I'd say on election calendars, two important roles that they serve. Number one, they keep you on track, so you can go back and do it. But also they can provide a wealth of story ideas. If you just look and see what, and if you look on page 5, these, again, I'm going to highlight some things, but I'd like to have people kind of speak out or ask questions or see, how many of you, I have, in January, just throw a date, but January 22nd, send an introductory letter to candidates for the spring election. How many of you send a letter to your candidates after they've announced? What are some of the things what do you say, or what do you...
Typically, I just introduce myself in our newspaper, and then I'll, of course, include advertising rate sheet for them and all the rules as far as advertising goes. And then kind of a small calendar on when we will send our Q&A to them and whatever else I think of to throw in there.
That's good stuff. We'll talk more about some of these in a little more depth, but the advertising, the rate sheet, how many newspapers have a formal meeting between news and advertising to talk about the elections? What are some of the things, what do you do or why, or?
Well, actually, this was the first year that we've done this. We also had a formal meeting with all of the candidates. We invited the candidates, incumbents, and those running in contested and not contested races to a gathering where we presented all the information to them about advertising rates, the editorial rules, so on and so forth.
Great. Anybody else? You know, we'll get a little more depth in that later, but you know, oftentimes, you know, your advertising staffs, you know, if a new merchant comes to business, you lay out an advertising campaign, you present the plan to them, but we don't do that with political advertising. And as you get the races higher up the ladder, you know, where it's so much television in the broader, the bigger metro media, but that's something that you should be thinking about in the local level, is that, have you ever asked them? Have you ever gone to them and said, you know, and presented a package, presented a plan? If you look on, you know, under March, you know, I had poll area candidates in the general election, you know, for those who have not yet announced. Don't let, you know, go to them. Don't kind of be spoon-fed the news. Is somebody going to run or not? You all, in your newsrooms, you probably have all heard in the community. You have the pulse of the community. Say, well, I'm not thinking about running. I'm not going to, or something. You hear about that. I mean, go ahead and be up front. Be first with it. Alert the community and say, these 6 individuals are up for school board or county board or city council or whatever it may be, or local legislative seats, and see if they're going to run. If they haven't, you know, you also can do a story on, you know, who are some potential, you know, if somebody's not running, probably names come to surface, and be proactive and maybe check with some of those and kind of do an informal poll and say, you know, are you interested in running? You know, if you look through on I have in March, this I think it was off the Missouri Secretary of State's office, where it says candidate committee organization deadline on March 9th. I haven't seen those, but I'm assuming if it's a candidate committee organization deadline, that it probably lists. I don't know, does anybody know, does it list who's on the candidate committee? And so, you know, by looking at those lists, and are there any surprises there? I mean, depending if this is for, you know, if it's for a rate, I mean, is somebody, if it's on a legislative or something, I mean, is there a surprise that name's not on their committee, or maybe it's an individual who's on the committee, their committee chair, that was active in some other campaign? But I mean, just looking through that, seeing who the names are. You may not report it, but I mean, it just might be interesting to look through. And again, the idea is you're looking at it, see if there are potential story ideas out there. April 4th, I put out here April 14th, prepare for reorganizational meetings of government bodies, explore potential stories. I mean, after every single election, whether, I mean, especially in the local level, if, you know, look, if there's a big turnover, you know, is there a story there? You know, if the voting block changed? And what are the dynamics of it? And again, sharing that with your readers and telling you, so your readers understand, hey, something big happened, they made the vote, but just exploring, and if they, you know, if they reorganize, they elect a new chair, they elect a new mayor, they elect however they are organized. But you can also kind of be advanced with that. And if, you know, I know like in Red Wing, you'd have the November election, I think the city council reorganized in January. But you can be, you know, we knew before January, we heard the talk, well, so-and-so is going to be up, 2 people are campaigning for city council, for the city council president. So if you know that, go ahead, do that in advance. And you can have an advance of the reorganizational meeting saying that, you know, 2 individuals are vying for this top spot, and maybe even poll the council members. But just think ahead and don't sit back and just have kind of the news come to you, but you can be proactive, you can be aggressive with it. In June, you know, I had, like, for when you're thinking about the greater election, have that discussion whether you should have a voter guide. How many newspapers produce a voter guide? What are some of the challenges or the pros and cons of it? Anybody? If you do the voter guide, you still have kind of regular continuing coverage. Is that kind of your coverage, or do you do other, you know, coverage or other editions? Yes.
We usually have to work quite a ways ahead on those voter guides, and it makes it kind of hard to get all your ducks in a row and get all the candidates covered with equal coverage.
And that is one of the challenges, the lead time for getting it done. And also, I guess I would just caution, if you do the voter's guide, it can be, you can often say, okay, we've done the voter's guide, that's our election coverage, we've kind of done our due diligence, and remember that's just one slice of it, that there's still a whole lot of other stuff going on. You should just not, if you're going through a months-long campaign season, and also you have nothing in your addition but just the one voter's guide, you're missing out on some good stories and some continuing coverage. Any other, as you glance through in September, I just, again, kind of your internal to-do list is that, make sure you have complete biographical information and photos on all your candidates. I mean, you should have, how many times, I remember when we were scrambling and we were ready to lay out our candidates, we had all the photos but one, we had color photos for everybody, and we had black and white from here. Well, they would scrutinize that. I guarantee had we run 8 candidates, 7 color photos and 1 black and white, today everything pretty much, color is the world, but I mean I'm dating myself a little bit, back then when color was first coming on. And so, but paying attention to that and being aware of that, but having that in your internal to-do list. But then on the external list, some of these other, like say, these filing dates, election dates. So looking at that composite calendar, and one of how many of you do coverage with like congressional candidates or legislative candidates? And do you have challenges on kind of lining up or getting interviews with them, or it goes?
It's mostly Republicans that are running unfettered into the either state or whatnot. But we do have very close relationships with our state legislature. Are you talking about U.S. or state? State, yeah.
That could be
Yeah, we do have a couple of contested races. In fact, we had a gentleman just announce in our coverage area against one of the Republicans who's only been in for 1 term. So we do try to keep, and a lot of them write, you're talking about how to keep them engaged when it's not election season. We have so many politicians that contribute guest columns to us, and of course we filter through those to make sure that that's something we want on our opinion page, not that it matters to us in our opinion, but that it's not just a campaign.
Right, not just campaign PR, but it's got some substance to it.
Right, exactly. And so we have probably 4 or 5 regular columnists on a regular basis, so that keeps us engaged with them kind of in the off season of elections.
And I would also, one caution, word of caution, I say, when election season, whenever you determine the campaign has started for November, whatever month that is, I would say scrutinize, and it sounds like you do all the time, but scrutinize those columns very closely, because the incumbents will oftentimes just use that to say what great things that they have done at the Capitol, and it becomes really an advertorial. And so I think, scrutinize that and be, feel totally comfortable in just rejecting it. How many of you, in legislative, you frankly, you don't feel kind of comfortable, knowledgeable on the issues to kind of interview? You feel almost, you're just challenged by it. Well, my one thought that on when I talk about kind of internal calendars and external calendars, but also with legislative races, is that you might sit there and you're doing your calendar and you say, okay, so on September 6th, 7th, and 8th, we're going to run these profiles, and we're going to call the candidates, and we're going to, so you call them 2 weeks in advance, and you say, we want to sit down and do the interview. Well, that legislative candidate might have 6 community newspapers in his or her area, and they have a job, maybe they have other things, they're campaigning, and so you have to think ahead. You just can't flip on the switch and say, why aren't they coming here to do the interview? So that's kind of thinking of their external calendars. But my other point on that is, think about if you had 4 or 5 or 6 papers in a legislator's district, and you may well compete for news, you may well compete for advertising dollars, you're still competing on a regular basis. But think of having a joint interview session with those legislative candidates. And first of all, the legislative candidate might say, wow, I all of a sudden don't have to go around 6 newspapers, I can gather all in one. And the secondly, though, is you all get to feed off of each other's questions. You'll still write the story on the issues in your community, what's important to your readers, but you also may gain insight on that candidate, and it may be a more robust discussion by having you all together in that room and everybody throwing out questions. might be something that somebody threw out that you just never had any idea, or didn't even think about it. So it's just an idea for, for kind of as you go up that political ladder, and as your resources are limited, and as you don't frankly have the knowledge level, the background to do some of those interviews, of kind of doing that group interview. Any other comments or ideas or thoughts on calendars? Maybe something you've done or something you've run into problems with? Yes.
But one of the things that we do every year, and if I'm sure papers here are doing it, and if you're not, I'd encourage you to, is we take it upon ourselves, you're talking about those group interviews, we hold forums. We don't leave the forums to the other groups to do. We take the lead on saying, we're gonna book the community center, we're gonna book the candidates, and we're gonna run house ads, and we're gonna do PR and get those candidates there in front of the voters. I think that puts us as a newspaper in the forefront, and we carve out the niche that we are the leader in election coverage. Then you want to come to us for advertising, that's great. You want to come to us for letters, that's great. But we've done this in Cass County and in Lee Summit for many years, and we'll fill up a conference room at a community center. It used to be this thing that no one would come to a local political forum, but you do the right prep for it, and you get them there. I think it's our responsibility as newspapers to hold those forums and for us to bring the candidates to the people. Now, we do that in print, but there's, I think, a lot can be said for doing that in an open forum. We get to direct the questions, we get to take questions from the audience. That's our forum. We don't wait for other people to hopefully throw a forum that we can cover. We throw the forum.
That's a great idea, and I think a couple of things on forums, on debates as you're going, this is both in calendars and in coverage. First of all, just because if the League of Women Voters, or maybe the Chamber of Commerce, or maybe Organized Labor has a forum, or maybe there's an environmental league that has a forum, you shouldn't feel compelled to cover each and every debate. I think you have to look and say, is this now maybe there's some environmental issue, and there's some environmental group which is covering it very big in a race, you may want to cover that. But consider that you're a newspaper for broad interest readership, and so to identify which of those forums you need to cover, which of those you should announce. Secondly, on that, if you've already covered, think of where the timing falls. If you've just had your city council profiles run the week of August 10th, and August 19th there's a city council debate, a forum, if you've just covered it thoroughly in your newspaper, you may feel compelled to show up and be there, but if you do that, then think about, report just what's new. I mean, if you've already done your job with it, and just to take your resources and your space in the paper and run that that coverage of that may not be worthwhile. I think also that if you on forums, make them substantive, and people want to read it. I mean, you cover forums for issues. I give a couple examples where I read in some of the papers that were sent to me. And there was one that talked about, it quoted, and it said that, it had a quote from the individual. It says, the candidates also talked about family. And he said, I've been married for 27 years, I have 4 children and 3 kids. And it was in a direct quote. Biographical information is very important. I guess 2 thoughts on that. Number one, if you probably have written that bio on those candidates well before the debate. I mean, I would think when you introduced the candidates, you probably did that. But number two, if you're going to do that, if you want to run the bio, have that as a sidebar, a little bio box. If you all of a sudden have used 12 or 15 precious words in a debate of someone just saying their bio. And so I think that you'll think carefully on that and on how you do that. And the last thing is on forums. How many newspapers? Somebody else, I think Al might be, or somebody's talking tomorrow about endorsing candidates. But how many of you do endorse candidates? And and maybe you're well aware of this, but be alert if there are community forums you're going to cover, or if you're going to do your candidate profiles. Look at the timing of your endorsements. I was asked to be a panelist on one League of Women Voters forum, and it was on city council races, and we had endorsed on that 2 days before, and they said, well, you can't be a panelist because your bias has been shown. And I was fine with that. I mean, I was just going to ask the question. But I mean, be aware of your timing. And so if you have anything to do with an organization, I mean, obviously if you do a community forum for the newspaper, you're going to have that forum ideally before you do the endorsements. But if you're aware of a group, sometimes you'll have conversations with a group that they're planning a forum. Find out and say, well, you know, you can work with them and say, we're doing our candidate profiles that week. Maybe you want to have the forum a week earlier, a week later, or if you're going to do endorsement, work with them, and it'll make their event more worthwhile, and you'll be in a stronger position of kind of deciding how to do that coverage. So I want to go on the generating political advertising. And somebody here, a few of you have mentioned about sitting down and meeting with your ad department. You know, publishers often, I mean, how many times have the publishers made the comment, look at all this great free publicity we're giving the candidates. Where's their advertising? Why aren't we getting any money out of them? And I guess I kind of go back and say, have you ever asked them? Better yet, are you prepared to ask them? And I think that goes to the point that, do you have a plan to introduce yourselves to the candidates? And as some individuals talk, you do send the letter, and you say, here are our news deadlines, and here's our advertising rate sheet. But every internal calendar ought to set aside that time. The news and advertising staff should get together. Then you should have that continuing conversation, connecting with each other on a regular basis. But know the issues. If you develop a campaign, promote your market share. If you were going to, same way if your ad staff is going off and a new store comes to town, what do? You have a plan. You present a plan and develop a campaign. And so, present candidates. If you look on page 8 and 9, on the kind of some pointers and some things to think about in promoting advertising, is developing that advertising package, and present them with the spectrum of opportunities from web to the print edition, to video on the web, to whatever things you do on the web. You have a lot of different avenues. Know your market share. I mean, most community newspapers are the primary source of local news. Don't be unafraid to tell your candidate that there may be the radio station, there may be the newspaper, and there may be, variety of newspapers, might be other local media, but show the facts and say, hey, we cover the territory, and we ought to have, as you spend your dollars, you ought to be in proportion to what the readership is, and present that strong argument and lay it out for them. My one argument, or my general manager used to tell me that the favorite argument you would hear in terms of way to combat radio advertising, and somebody would say, combat newspaper and radio, and they'd say, well, in radio, picture a guy winking a good-looking gal across the room in the dark. It's like, I already fumbled up the punchline, but radio advertising is like a guy winking at a girl in the dark. You're sending the message, but is she receiving it? Newspapers, you're invited to the households, you're invited in the community, in the households to read the stories, and you can promote that market share. Be aware also as you go up for, in the legislative districts, as you go up higher up the political ladder, there's always, they usually look to the bigger media and a lot with broadcast. But be aware of, if you have a local legislative district, which is a swing district, where it's highly contested and there may be special interests, or there may be the caucuses, the Democrat, Republican, whatever other caucus out there, who is throwing extra money into those local races, because that's important for control of the House or the Senate, or whatever it may be. Yes?
Sorry, I just had a quick question for clarity. Are you suggesting that reporters do some of these things in generating political advertising?
No. Okay. No, I'm saying reporters should meet, you should obviously have a distinct separation between news and advertising. I'm saying that it behooves the news staffs and the advertising staff to get together so the reporters can orient the ad staffs and say, hey, here's a hot race, here's a hot local, but not the reporter go forward. And maybe that's not clear in the handout. I'll fix that. So. But how much success have you had in political advertising on local races? Some of you who've had the meeting, yes.
We actually, once we get our foot in the door, we offer to consolidate their advertising for competitor newspapers. So we kind of become their little small ad agency and create advertising that they can send out to other newspapers if they so desire. Of course, they run in our paper first, and they take care of paying for it directly to that newspaper, not through us or anything like that. But we feel like we're able to get a consistent message out with a consistent look for that candidate, and we'll go both sides, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter, but we don't endorse candidates, so they're very welcome at our doorstep all through the races.
And that, that can be a challenge if you do endorse candidates. I mean, I know of individuals who just would not advertise with us because they knew they were not going to get endorsed. So you do have to obviously make that argument of separating news from advertising. But I think I guess that oftentimes political advertising is an afterthought, and I think you should put that at the forefront. And again, promoting a candidate's no different than promoting a new product or a new store. So candidates stand their best chance of securing votes if they're in front of readers early and often. So you can present that campaign, and you should have a pulse of that campaign. And as the issues change or something, you can provide an advertising series for them, just as you would for something else. Is there I'm assuming everybody here is from the news side. Is there anybody here from advertising side or works in the advertising at all? Thoughts on?
I'm both.
So you have any?
Well, one of the things that we found successful is we do a sliding scale for, we set a separate ad rate for political. That's we have a separate piece of our rate card. It's kind of off the rate card, but we set a scale where each ad has a different declining rate. It's X dollars per column inch for the first ad, and it goes down for the second, the third, and the fourth. We've noticed that encourages a lot of candidates to run 4 ads. We don't want them just putting in 1 ad prior to the election, or even running a few ads prior to the election, and then perhaps a thank you for electing me ad after the election.
Somebody else had a comment or not? And the other thing, you also are in the best position if you have a voter's guide, if there's a candidate debate that you're covering. If you're running the city council profiles this week, you know the dates. If you coordinate with the news department, you know the dates, so you can go to your candidate and say, hey, this is the week we're running all the candidate profiles. You might want to put your ad in that week when people are reading about those set of races, whether school or county or city, wherever it might be. So you just cannot, having that cross-pollination of the news and advertising talking together, again, you're approaching them distinctly. A news reporter is approaching for news and advertising rep for advertising, but internally you should have those discussions. So we've developed a master calendar. You've talked to your advertising staff, and you have the plan to go forward for promoting your newspaper as a place for candidates to be. Has anybody told the candidates? Have you introduced yourself to the candidates? And we've talked about some of those. You've talked about the introductory letter, but if you look on page 10 and 11, and again, these are food for thought. There's one checklist, one brainstorming. You can go back to your staffs, and you may be doing a lot of these things. Some of these things may not make sense to you. But again, to think about how you can use this to make coverage more relevant, to be more organized. But starting off if you look on page 10, write a welcome at the top of it, sample. Congratulations on your decision to seek elective office. We commend you for giving your time and talent to help make this community a better place to live. As a primary source of local news, we take election coverage seriously. We consider it one of our most important journalistic and civic duties to assist you in your campaign. Here are some answers to the most frequently asked questions by candidates. We look forward to connecting and working with you. And then put in that letter what you need from them. And I won't go through all of these, but you need photos from the news side, you need bios, you need contact information. And then also, what candidates should know from your end. And so both in the news and the advertising, are you going to have a special section? Are you going to have a voter's guide? What are the deadlines? What are your advertising deadlines? Are you going, and have an advertising rate sheet, or however you do, or have that face. I think you want to send the letter to them, and then when you follow up with that face-to-face discussion in the introduction. Election day ads. Do your states permit them, and do you run them? Letters to the editor. What's your policy for letters to the editor? Just kind of rifle through. Do you endorse candidates? And if you do, explain to them why you do it. press releases, be upfront and say, we've all seen, even on local campaigns, some candidates can just churn out the releases and have that discussion, explain that we'll look at them on for their individual merit, on a case-by-case basis. And also make it clear that if you have a press release promoting something or charging something, whether it's a challenger making a charge against the incumbent or incumbent, whatever it may be, that your goal is to present both sides of that issue in the same release. So if a press release comes in, just like with any other story, you're not going to just accept it verbatim, but you may be calling to get the other side. You might be going to round out that release. Photos, just, again, you kind of photo requests, you look at those on a case-by-case basis. But just doing a very simple explanatory letter to them, and that way they know, be first on their doorstep. Get that out there, but follow up with a letter, say I will be in contact with you, and especially from the advertising end, sit down, make that appointment, and then you may, depending how, you can just see what works for your organization, whether you have, whether you want to formally obviously you're going to do some sort of a news story on them, so you'll have some introduction to them on that basis, but how you introduce your new staff or how you introduce your news coverage to them on a face-to-face basis. Yes, Scott?
I'm wondering who you think at the newspaper would most appropriately send a letter like this. Because there are some things that you're suggesting should be in this letter that a reporter might be interested in, like the basic biographical information. But as Andrew was suggesting earlier, a reporter might not be too comfortable including in his letter, hey, by the way, here's our ad deadlines, or talking about the newspaper's endorsement policy. So is this a letter that ought to come from the publisher, maybe?
I think the letter could go from a publisher, or could it be co-signed by editor, advertising manager? I think in this letter too, somehow in there you make it clear we're a distinct operation, we're separate operations, and also in that letter, I think I had on there somewhere is the last item is if they have a complaint, you're not encouraging, but complaints or questions are going to surface. But have somebody, if you have a question about something, who do you contact? You don't want them contacting the reporter. You want them contacting the publisher, or you want them contacting the editor, or you want. Now again, in some small operations, you may be publisher, editor, and chief reporter. You're everything, and so that becomes trickier in it. But to Scott's point, be aware of who should be signing that letter. You don't want certainly come from just a news person when you're talking about advertising and vice versa. It's either co-signature or singular. People who have used these letters, have they worked? Has it been good? A good response, or is it a lot? Does anybody not do them? Again, I think I would just recommend that that's a way of getting yourself up front and let them know. And it's all about building relationships too. If you introduce yourself and say, we're here, also as they go through the process and get elected, you just have started to build a solid foundation, a stronger relationship with them, getting to know them on a personal as well as a professional basis. I'd like to next go into the other thing is always explain in your coverage, and I think that on your what page that handout is on. I think that slide might be out of place, but throughout your coverage, explain again. There's a whole variety of opportunities for explaining to Peter why you do it, with the hows and whys, the do's and don'ts behind your coverage. And we had a letter to the editor where somebody said, you didn't cover the conventions, the district conventions. There must have been a minute, basically saying you're too cheap, you wouldn't send a reporter to it. So we actually wrote, and I think the column is in your handouts, where it talks about what our decisions were. But it was a good conversation for our newsroom, but also we explained that there were district conventions in Minnesota, and county conventions, and congressional conventions, and we just decided to kind of skip one level and go to the next. But as you go through things, use the opportunity to have those explanatory columns with your readers. So let's go on to the candidates themselves. So who are the central figures in any race, in any election? It is the candidates. So why should we pay attention to how candidates are introduced to the electorate? Well, I call it the yo-yo factor. So take this scenario, it's a Friday afternoon, your office is about to close up, somebody walks in and says, I'm running for whatever office it is. Rookie reporter's alone in the newsroom. Nobody to look in, they're the only person. They're 5 minutes away from locking the door and walking out. So you're on your own. So, once the interview is done, how is it displayed? Do all the announcements receive similar treatment? Does it matter whether a candidate is an incumbent or a challenger? I think you can go through a whole list of things. And again, if you look on handouts on page 13 and 14, is to looking at the different considerations for announcing candidates to your electorate. In simplest terms, the first impressions of a candidate mean everything, to the electorate. And your newspaper, again, is in that perfect position to serve, to serve that role, to make those introductions. As you approach the interviews, it might be easiest also to put yourself in the shoes of the candidate. You all likely remember, when you had the interview for the first job, or your most recent job, and what were the most meaningful questions, what were the toughest questions. Obviously, you don't want to ask questions that are just yes and no. You want them to think. You want to get kind of we all have our prior standard run-of-the-mill questions. We also think out of the box. And, no matter what the particular office is, they are applying for a job. And so their answers, they want to convince their bosses, they want to convince their electorate that they're the best individual for that job. So it's your responsibility to help present that information in a meaningful and informative way to your readers. If we look on pages, there's several here, but look on pages 12, 13. So I think walking through, and again, I won't go through all these bullets, but this is some things to think about as you're introducing the candidates. You obviously have to know the issues, and it's easiest, I think, is you're assigning candidates, assigning reporters to races. If you cover school board, you're probably in the best position to quiz the school board candidates. If you're covering city council, et cetera. Now again, as I say that, how many here do it all? And so you have to go through, and one thing as you're doing, one opportunity is also to do Q&As. I made a couple thoughts on Q&As, and how many here do a lot of your coverage for your candidate interviews on the Q&A? You send them the question, they respond. Okay, and so a couple pointers on that. Number one, whoever is editing, I think you should look again at display. And you should look at what's content, what's in those Q&As, and have the same individual edit those Q&As at least for the same races. If you have 5 people who are vying for city council, and if you do have the ability, if you have the luxury of not one person doing all the city council, school board, and county board, and all that, but if you can divide it up so if somebody's editing those down, that they are kind of using a similar editing, they're carrying out the similar things, so there's some consistency. Have word limits. Have it be substantive. Remember, that's precious space in your paper. And a couple examples I saw, there was one that, it had at the top, it was some local race, and it had the banner, Harry Brown. And the first sentence in the bio said, "My name is Harry Brown," and then went on. Just, think of, again, especially on, how you should, obviously, that's repetitive, you don't need it, but also, when you're asking candidates for attributes, there was one that said, "My wife my biggest treasure on earth is my wife." Now, I appreciate that everybody thinks highly of their spouse, but again, if you're reading that, if you put that in, you're kind of opening the floodgates for having kinds of comments. It's going to be all over the place. And if you want readers to pick up and look to those profiles, you want to be something. You want to stick to the issues. You want to have it distilled, so you have to put enough information out there so they can read it, but you have to put some word limits. And if you just have a page, I've seen pages where it's just not even, there might be a mugshot and that's it. Think of ways that you can graphically, that you can ask a graphic element. If nothing else, put a boundary of the election district that this city council or county board, wherever it might be. So it's just so that this is the person, this is the election district that they represent. So when readers look at that, they know, hey, this is, it's got to be readable enough that they know that this applies to me. I should be reading this one. But just don't let the Q&As become a free-for-all, but you still have to have some discipline, some substance, as you edit those. If you do candidate interviews, you have to, it is a challenge sometimes to be up, again, if you go up the political ladder for legislative or congressional, and you aren't as familiar with those, but you have to be prepared to kind of cross-examine them. And I wouldn't be afraid, maybe only one person will write it, but we often had two people sitting in the interviews. I kind of knew, as editor, I was a little more, had kind of broader public affairs knowledge, and so if I had, especially a rookie reporter going in an interview, I'd sit in the interview. And obviously, we actually used some of that too for kind of our endorsement interview. So I could get a feel for what the candidate was, and we could use that as we considered our endorsements for that race. But I think you also, again, want to assign reporters to specific races, so they're all asking the same question, they're all getting the same feel. Decide on a format for the races. Oftentimes you have a profile, and then maybe you'll have a bio box, and then you'll have some basic, some basic, maybe still a Q&A on the issues. But a way of stretching your resources, I mean, oftentimes a profile, why are you running, who is she, what are they about? And if you have I know one Metro paper, one election season they went through, and they obviously had immense resources, but they had like reporters from other states who never covered a stitch of politics in their life write the profiles. It was just different flavor. And what if you had a sports reporter do the profile on a candidate? Again, you want to be sure that on the issues, you may have a Q&A on the issues, you may have ask the same 6 questions of each candidate and where they stand and why. But you may just have a real, enlightening, different style of writing on the candidate. And so if you're able to kind of combine a profile along with a straight, hardcore issue stuff, that's one way of expanding your resources and offering maybe a different light, a different style to the writing. Again, as you do the races, as you're developing your Q&As, remember that each race will have, you have some questions that apply to every single race, but some races have distinctive questions. Obviously, if there's a particular issue in a school board or county board or city council, so you want to obviously brainstorm well in advance. And the oddity is, if you're doing your kind of everyday coverage of some pretty solid public affairs coverage, you got to pretty early in the season. I mean, you got to be able to, in February, sit down and say, municipal elections now or the spring. But if there's any local elections that are in the fall, you can March, April, May, you can really identify and line up 90% of those issues and what they should be, and being more organized with it. And then again, you have to just decide how much attention you want to give to the regional and statewide candidates. And if a local candidate, a local resident is running for region, we had our former mayor was running for U.S. Congress, so obviously gave some extra coverage to that because it was a local resident. So you have those instances where a local resident's running for a higher office. But then the other is just make a decision on what kind of coverage you can give to those, you want to give to those. One idea is you could have, on an online, you can even have, I remember one local paper said, there's a big press conference 15 miles down the road and we couldn't be there, but it affected their area. What about the idea of having a citizen panelist? I mean, you see some of these where they identify the demographics of man, woman, old, young, whatever, the different demographics of the community, but have them weigh in on races throughout the election season. And maybe that's the way that you do maybe that's where you cover a big press conference for a U.S. Senate race, which might be important in your race down the community. Just have people write in and weigh in and blogs, I mean, basically, to put their opinion. But you could have kind of this panel monitor, and you could do that for any race, but just kind of give their feedback on what they think of a twist and turn in a race, or just be another voice in your newspaper, a different perspective on the coverage. I would flip over to page 15 and 16. Interviewing the candidates. And this is just one sample list, one going through of just rifling through a variety of questions that you can ask your candidates. But you want to try and get not just the standard questions, but if you look, obviously what prompted you to seek office? Was it a personal initiative, or were you were encouraged by others? but what are the most important issues? But if you look, what's your chief strength and weakness? What's your opponent's chief strength and weakness? What do you bring to the table that your opponent doesn't bring to the table? How can you with one vote make a difference on a policy-making board? Do you support term limits if that's something that's relevant to your races? You're elected to represent your constituency, yet at some point their wishes and beliefs likely will be contradictory to your personal beliefs. How do you vote for your constituency or your personal? What specific practices will you implement to keep in contact with readers? Everybody runs for offices. I'll keep in contact. I'll listen to my constituents. But have them pinned down. Be specific. I mean, you can go through. There's this. I brainstormed myself about 10 minutes. Came up with those questions. You can have another brainstorming session, and just think through. But try and think beyond the obvious. You're obviously going to ask them all the chief issues in that local race. You're going to ask where they stand. If there's a proposal in school to say change from half-day to everyday kindergarten, half-day every other day, you're going to ask them that. If there's, there's some certain things of maybe there's a contentious zoning proposal out there the county's dealing with that come before the new county board, so you might ask them that. But think out of the box on some other things, and just get them to, just to have a more rounded interview and have different insight in the personality or the, of that candidate. And, on the backside, is there anything else you'd like to add? I mean, you think it may have been exhaustive, but ask that question. But what's the one question that you should ask? And I kind of phrased it already. What's the one question you should ask every candidate? I mean, it's not a trick question. What you should ask everybody? Why are you running? Why are you running? And you may be surprised by the answer. I give you an example. I read it was in Washington State, I think. And there was a county commissioner race. And the individual, they were in the interview, and I think the editor was interviewing the candidate. And he said, "Why are you running?" And it was an elderly gentleman. He put his arms down on the desk, leaned over, opened his mouth, and he said, "For dental insurance." He actually said that. He had a horrible set of teeth. I'm just saying, you may get some, I don't know how they report it. I don't know if they won. But I mean, the most, don't be afraid to ask the basic questions. I mean, there might be something that'll totally come out that is surprising to you and to your readers. And he was unafraid to talk about it, apparently. Anything on interviewing candidates? Any anecdotes you have? Any challenges you have? Anything that would be worthwhile for others to know? What worked? What didn't work? Al.
Jim, in my experience in covering local elections as a reporter for a statewide newspaper, I always found when I went into a county, people were wary about talking about their own races, but if you got them off the record talking about other people's races, you could find a lot of good questions to ask those people.
That's a good point. Yeah. Once you have them, that captive audience in the room, it's amazing what they will share. So again, as we talked about, interview them as if they're applying for a job. And again, you're in the best position to present that information in a clear, meaningful manner. Know your issues, prepare the questions, signing a report, deciding on a format, working with the advertising department beforehand so they can be aware of the issues and what they might use in an advertising campaign. And, and also scrutinizing the press releases. I think that, how many of you, have had, candidates, challengers, or incumbents that just send you weekly press releases? And do you run them all? What do you tell them? How do you handle them? Or fine. Well, that is, they become an advertorial. Just like with tomorrow, I'll talk a little bit about Letters the Editor, and we all know how letter writing campaigns are very orchestrated, and that becomes, they supplement their campaign budget by running Letters the Editor.
Yeah, actually, at a previous paper I was at, over here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's exactly what we did. We told them, hey, we have paid election letters. Here are
Yeah.
the parameters. You can get your message out that way. If it's something that doesn't rise to the level of newsworthiness. So.
Mm-hmm. And on page 17, again, a column, I don't think, explaining your reader ground rules for political campaigns, and again, talk to your readers about, explain to it. On this one, it talked about, I think we talked about, we would have voters guide, we give preference to local races, but we just talked about things for the campaigns. And one thing on the slide here, I'd say, be ready again for the scripted answers to the usual question. I can tell you that I had several candidate interviews where they would come in and they had, especially if they're running for legislative office, new candidates, you knew they had been, every legislative caucus, has a training program for candidates, and they give them answers, and he came in with his cheat sheet, and so and he knew some of the primary questions you were going to ask, and he had the answers scripted down to it. So you want to challenge them, you want to cross-examine them, but that's another reason for kind of getting them off the plate of the standard questions and get them some of the unorthodox questions and get them to think on their feet. And you can also use that as a way, if you are doing endorsing of candidates, it'll give you some insight into just kind of how they can serve them if they're just a robot, and you should be unafraid to say that. Scott?
Along those lines, Jim, I'm kind of curious how many of you folks are in the habit of sending your Q&As to candidates and letting them write the answers? Do you find that you get better answers that way than you would in person? I'm just curious what the results are of that.
Yes.
Sometimes they are better than they would be in person. Our trouble has been keeping them in their space allotted. We'll have some candidates that give us an entire book, and so we'll have to go back and say, you really got to cut this down. But I think it makes them sound better when they have a little more time to think about what they're going to say and process it a little better.
Others on that point?
It helps to, we put right on the questionnaire that you're going to get X number of words for each question. So there's no, we get the books too occasionally. We still get the handwritten ones occasionally that we have to go back and ask them to clarify whatever it is they're trying to write. But sometimes the candidates want to use that as a platform for more than one thing. It's a Q&A / letter to the editor / ad campaign, and half of what they're going to turn in when they do a forum. So you've got to rein them in, because the more in-depth stories are going to come. You're gonna cover them in forums and cover them in other ways and different events, and they've got to use that space wisely. And if they're going to run for office, they should probably be able to communicate that in an amount of words that's going to make sense to the readers.
Scott, I like to see how well they communicate written word. Give them 50 to 100 words and see if they can express themselves. And it's interesting to see who can stay within that parameter of limited number of words, or do they write 300 words and expect you to, just tell them cut it down. I'll cut it down to 100 words maximum. But it's kind of interesting to see their written thought process.
It can be interesting, but they can always ghostwrite them too.
Right.
Okay, Brian, you have a question from an online person?
I think Al covered it. How many of you believe that they actually wrote those answers and not their campaign manager or their party chairman?
Especially if you get up to a legislative or congressional level. I mean, a local candidate, I would think, would, they'll probably be writing most of their answers, but as you go up the ladder, you can be pretty sure. I mean, if you went and saw, I would challenge, if you have 6 Democrat or Republican legislative candidates from 6 different districts across the state, and you had a common question answered of all of them, there'd be pretty similar responses, and maybe some verbatim words, because they've had, the helping hand.
Yeah, I think it does vary from one candidate to another, whether you're going to actually get that candidate's writing. We actually had a candidate visit the Missourian a couple weeks ago, a local candidate for city council, who said he preferred email or text questions because he liked to write his answers and run them through his team and have them revise them for him and make sure they're all accurate. And we just had to explain to him that we're not going to play that game.
And it may, to your point, it is interesting to see how they can communicate, and if they can follow. If it's a 100-word limit, they give you 250. And on the surface, too, you may think that having them write it is easier, but you probably all have got them, too, where you've had to pare them down, they've been overwritten. I mean, sometimes Although you might think, well, they write it, I don't have to sit there and interview them. But if you do a face-to-face interview and do a bullet point on 6 or 8 or 10 or however many issues, and then you write the answers, you might even, in some instances, you might see yourself saving time, and it'll be more succinct. Yes?
I could see a dilemma coming up with editing and whether to edit or not, especially in municipal races. Let's face it, some candidates aren't necessarily the most literate people, in terms of grammar, that sort of stuff. Do you say, okay, you write it, that's how it goes in, which could make readers, when they read that, think, oh, this is...
When I ask candidates in primaries where you want to run an issue grid, candidates this way and issues that way, and you've got a specific amount of space, I make clear to them up front, we will edit for space. You need to limit these answers to 50 words, 60 words, or whatever, because what we're interested in is giving people a capsule glimpse of the differences between the candidates on the issues. We don't want, you're not writing for people who are, reading narrative or wanting some flowery language. They want to know about issues, and I think that's one of the more effective ways to present that kind of information.
Yeah, I think you have to be upfront with all and say subject to editing. Typically, if they follow the word limits, you probably don't have to do a whole lot of editing. You might do some grammar, you might do some, I always was challenged that they just didn't follow the word limits, and so it just took, it took a lion's share of time to pare them down. You had a comment?
We do specify that it's in your words, in your own words. I do fix spelling mistakes and simple grammar things, but otherwise it's theirs, and there will be even a little disclaimer on our page saying, while these may have been edited for space, it is in the candidate's own words.
Yes?
I think that in-person interviews tend to get the more honest answer right off the top of their head. They don't have the chance to kind of run it through several people, which is why I like that route. But for some of the more issue-oriented elections that I've covered, the ones that have been more controversial, I'll do kind of a print-style debate where I have a list of questions for each side of the issue. They get to respond, and then each side gets to see those responses and respond back to that one time, and we print the whole thing. And the word limit has been really challenging, but there was also issues with just people rejecting certain facts and getting into arguments of, this is the fact, and if you're not willing to change it, then I'm going to not run any of it. So
That's interesting, yeah. Yes?
Do you have any suggestions with dealing with candidates who don't want to do a Q&A? Everyone else is happy with the Q&A. One candidate says, I don't want to do it.
We had one once, and because part of it, I think they did not think we were going to give them a fair shake. We had our differences and other things, and we tried, we did 2 or 3 times, but in the end, we did say, we just printed and said so-and-so refused to participate in an interview, to do a survey. I mean, I think, I say, I'll give them 2 or 3 tries and and try and get a reason for them, and if they don't give a reason, but just you tell your readers that, because obviously if you have something from everybody but one, readers say why. So I don't know, anybody else deal with that?
We had a city councilman who was running and didn't feel that the newspaper had treated him fairly. And what we did, the reporter in this case said, fine, don't talk to the newspaper, talk to me. And tried to establish that you're not dealing with a monolith, you're dealing with that reporter. And in that case, it worked.
Okay. Yes.
One year we even tried, because let's face it, sometimes people don't want to read, especially when they get long. If there's 5 or 6 questions on a Q&A and some of them get to be 75 or 100 words, some people just aren't going to read that. They're going to pick out the question they want. We tried it in a graphic format once. It worked pretty well. Now it's pretty labor intensive, but we just ended up running a full page graphic with some of the candidates, candidates down the left side, questions on the top. Here are their answers. And we had to really have them drill down to 25, 50 words each on that, and each were pretty cooperative on doing that. But that was a really interesting way that we've only done it once to display that kind of a Q&A instead of just running it in text form. But on this issue, yeah, we've had several candidates, and we don't usually throw those out to uncontested races. We don't even have them do a questionnaire or do a story on them if they're not running against anybody, which I don't know if that's something that will come up during this, but we always make a point of telling them in the paper that this candidate did not turn in a questionnaire. And in couple of decades of covering elections, I've never seen a candidate that's not done one win an election unless they were uncontested.
But you raise a question of an uncontested race. How do people give coverage to an uncontested race?
In the past, our paper has done things like basically corral a lot of uncontested candidates, under some headline like, no opponents here, something like that, to at least introduce the voters to who is going to be the eventual office holder. We feel as if, while they don't have an opponent, at least doing some public service there and introducing to voters who they're inevitably going to have in office is doing them a favor, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty common sense approach. I mean, for uncontested, I think there's two camps. If you have the uncontested incumbent who's been in for 12 years and everybody knows him or her, I mean, you still do something, but you may not, do as much. Then we have the uncontested candidate who's the new fresh face filling an open seat or something. I mean, I think you obviously want to give attention to who they are and what they stand for and that, but to put them through kind of your regular grill of all your continuum of coverage, it probably is not necessary, but you want to certainly have their name out there. Yes.
There's always a potential for a write-in too, Jim.
That's right.
That people are always able to express their dissatisfaction with an uncontested incumbent by writing in.
How do people handle write-in candidates? I mean, if it comes in at, how many of you write-in candidates would come in at the 11th hour?
Yeah, we had a school board candidate actually, as a write-in when I was in Iowa. She came in at the very end and actually won. The first time I've ever seen that. She clearly had an orchestrated campaign, and in that race she only needed, I think, 86 votes to win. But I followed up with a column saying that next time, Joanna, you ought to put your name on the ballot and get out there and run so people can actually hear your platform. And she just threw an absolute fit about it. I put this together at the last minute. I just decided to do this. Well, that's not true. You didn't get 86 votes in a town of 1,500 to win a school board election just by throwing that together. She says she did, but more often than not, they're not 11th hour. And I think it's right and just to call them on. If you want to run. Get on the ballot and do what you should do to run. Although some of them do truly maybe decide very last moment to do that.
I mean, if we had a write-in candidate that came in 3 days after the filing deadline or something, missed the write-in, I think we would try our best to put them in our regular, continuum of coverage. I think the challenge, if you get with anything in 11th hour, even a 11th hour or the other, but a candidate 11th hour, if they kind of raise charges against the other candidates, how do you, give them a chance to respond? Yes.
I cover out county in Boone County here, and there are 9 villages and municipalities outside of Columbia. Out of those 9, there's 1 contested race in April. So that's a challenge or not. But there's and this is just kind of an observation, an interesting point. There's a village, a little community here called Hartsburg, down on the river bottom, south of Ashland. They elect their board of trustees every year by write-in vote. It's kind of traditional. Nobody actually files as a candidate. So, when people go to vote, they write in a candidate. And the interesting thing is that it's always usually the same people, or in a period of 3 or 4 years, it's the same cycle of people, the same 6 or 8. They're always the board of trustees. But, that's different than, the 11th hour write-in, which in all my years of doing this, I haven't really seen successful.
I think a sidebar to that, I think it's a great opportunity for an editorial if another election cycle is coming up and you're anticipating the same majority of uncontested races. I mean, writing something, I'm assuming that there may be some issues on those governing boards that they have to talk and decide, but encourage, here are a lot of, try and do something to encourage candidates and say, there's a lot of important issues out there. It would be nice to have a discussion, a conversation on the issues, and have a choice of who we elect. Yes?
One more comment back to Scott's original question about submitting the Q&As or in-person candidate interviews. We always, whenever we do a Q&A, we always have a form to go with it. And we will plan out a couple of months ahead of time which questions are we going to send to the forum? Which ones are we going to send in the Q&A? Because I think there's an opportunity with the Q&A where you can send in more complex issues and questions that might require them a little bit more research. And I think it's more fair to the candidate to give them that opportunity than if you're springing something on them right there in front of 500 people at a forum instead of trying to surprise them that way. So I think that's an important opportunity for them to show an ability to research an issue and possibly explain themselves and to give that insight to the voters.
Well, let's go on to the main event. So election night comes. So what's the most immediate news of elections? The numbers. Who won? Not a trick question. What's most regularly reported in newspapers? Well, I kind of call it, I guess it's the title of my book, votes and quotes. So you report the numbers and you report the quotes. And what's missing oftentimes is the analysis. And you can't always do that analysis in that next day's edition or the next week's edition, wherever your frequency is. But there are opportunities to give some fresh analysis. Or also, don't forget the opportunity to take that and use it in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later. And let me explain that a little bit. That if readers simply want to know, who won and who lost, I mean, they know that by websites, they know that by radio broadcasts, so you're presenting all this information the next day, which is numbers and quotes, what's being read, I mean, what is new information for them. And yet we all admire our edition with that comprehensive cover-to-cover coverage, and we expect people to read it from cover to cover. So you should do your best to try and tell people the story beyond the numbers. You should put just as much preparation into your post-election edition as into your campaign coverage. And it can be done, and if you start early enough and think about some of these, I'm going to go through some points. Right? And also some of these are on page 18 and 19 in the handouts. Even if, I'm sensitive to the limited resources you have, but again, if you think ahead, think of the planning, think of the organization, here's some ideas that you can do. Number one, before every election, when you're 2 weeks before that election, go back to the last major elections, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever, but look at those editions. Look at those editions and see what were some of the issues that were being talked about in the campaign. See what individuals ran on. If somebody ran on an issue and they were reelected, kind of look and say, okay, did they accomplish what in this election? What were those issues compared to 2 years ago? Have the issues, just have the issues change in the race. Just kind of look and see what's being talked about. Were there special circumstances in 2 years ago, and are they, but just take that edition, have a brainstorming session, a staff meeting, and read through the election coverage from 2 years ago. And what does it tell you? What stories what might it be? Make that edition, your post-election season, post-election edition, appealing and worth picking up. I kid you not, there was one Minnesota newspaper that this was like 12 years ago in a presidential election, and they had in their morning edition, maybe it was I don't know if it was morning or afternoon, but they literally had face-off headshots of the two U.S. presidential candidates. Now the election is over, and that morning after that, this face-off. I'm not sure it must have been a morning paper because the vote totals probably weren't done yet. It took up 2/3 of their front page, and so it must. I forget which presidential election was kind of a watershed election. What's that going to do for selling or for having a local reader to pick up compelling to read about a local race? Designed as I go on this handout. Think hard about spend time and maybe most of you do, but block out that front page. Block out your edition for the next day. How is it going to be organized? And so what are going to be the key races that you're going to look at? What are the ones that have been really the most important? What graphics are you going to use? Or you can have a chart in the front that says elections at a glance, and then turn to page 5 for these races, and 7 for this, and 8 for this. But block through that edition. And then also prepare for the unexpected. There's how many of you have come election night and some race has just gone totally caught you off guard? Must have happened at least somebody at one point. And so I mean, just plan for that, and what kind of attention. So as you're doing your resources, that election night, a lot of this, I'm not going to read through all these points, but gathering vote totals and posting them on the web, or if you're a hotline, telephone, or however you do it, try and get other people in your organization, in your newspaper office, to handle kind of the vote gathering and kind of that kind of thing. And even they can put together graphics or something, and then to vote, have the resources, your limited resources in the newsroom, have that be all hands on deck so you can really pursue the news. You can try and offer some meaningful interpretation. If you look through on, I've lost my place here, but on a couple other ideas for expanding or complementing your resources, supplementing your resources. If you're in a college town, is there a political science department? Or it doesn't have to be a political science, can somebody write a commentary on the election results? Doesn't have to be that night. For that edition, it can be for edition down the line. Or is there an elder statesman, someone who can just offer and reflect on the race and talk about, if you're in a district where, let's say, a school referendum, and yours failed, the majority of the state passed, why did it? And maybe have the two chairs, if there was a pro-school referendum and an anti-school referendum, have them write kind of like a point counterpoint, or what they learned, or what the elections showed them. Look at, again, look at for that post-election edition, for the easiest, if you're focusing on the local races, but on statewide races or something, just have, even if you carry, a story on the statewide race, but just have that simple graphic that says, for Missouri went 58% for the Democrat and 42 for the Republican, and then have an inset for your county or your city or what your local race is. I mean, just have a graphic. That might be the best you can do, but for covering races up the ladder, but just giving people a sense. So, what did we in our hometown, how did we align with the rest of the state on these races? The other thing is that think about what you, a lot of what you hear and gather that night. And it may not make sense right away, but I always say in the morning after the election, a lot of stuff makes sense. What could be kind of a fodder for an editorial? There's an example in I think your last handout on page 20, a editorial we wrote after one election, and there's a side here that says, on the surface, many people may see these races as separate outcomes, but upon closer review, one factor likely rang true in all three races. Voters sent a message they want tighter reins on public spending. But just don't, after the election's done and said with, and you're all exhausted, and you're all grueling, you say, thank God that 9-month season is over, we can go on. Don't forget the next steps. And don't think to bring that so you can explain to readers what happened and why it happened. And also on election night, as you identify your key races, don't feel compelled that you have to get a quote from every single winner and every single loser. If somebody was expected to win by a landslide, and they won by 70% of the vote, took 70% of the votes, do you really have to call them? I mean, you should have the results in, but do you really have to try and track down? And so identify the ones that have been most hotly contested, one that was a surprise result, and focus your attention on that. And then, again, as you're looking out for the edition a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, a natural one is on the local races again, if there's been a big swing on a voting block. And so now whatever it was in a city or school aligned on an issue, write about that and say, and maybe there was some issue out there that was brewing, was logjam going nowhere, and people were campaigning on that, and now it's going to advance, going to move forward. And that's what you should be telling your readers, that something which was stuck and going nowhere now has a renewed life because of the election that happened last week. Everybody, it's common to kind of say that the president, everybody rates the president his first 100 days in office. What has he accomplished? Kind of evaluating him. Well, look at that in a variety of local races. And just, and if you have, again, maybe one race was really in the spotlight, 100 days later, revisit, or they made these commitments, these promises, have they delivered? But check in on that and provide that continuum of coverage. It's, It's real easy, and we've all been there, that to sit there and just be exhausted that night and put it all aside, but you can bring a lot. You've been sitting there gathering, observing the dynamics of these races. You have a lot to share with your readers, news-wise and editorial-wise, with your perspective and what this means for the political landscape in the next, over the next several months. We're running close to reception times. I want to interfere with that, so because nobody will be listening to me. I want to run through some final remarks, and and we've had a chance to kind of talk what I kind of talk elements of coverage, where introducing the characters and the continuum of the coverage, and then reporting the conclusion, and you're certain to face, I think, a variety of questions and challenges in election coverage. I mean, you do it now, you see it, but how do you present balanced reporting of school referendums? After all, I would guarantee that your newspaper would probably be labeled anti-kids if you ever carried a news story or wrote an editorial. It would be worse, saying reject the school referendum. How do you report on judicial races? And some of these things I touch in my book, and it might be addressed later on this weekend. How do you determine what's news and what's advertising? There's a common thread to each of these elements of coverage, and that's that responsible coverage requires fairness and consistency. If an incumbent's re-election bid is reported on page 1, a challenger's announcement probably should receive similar play. If one candidate submits a letter to the editor elaborating on his or her campaign stances, and you publish it on the editorial page, complete with a mugshot, other candidates should probably receive similar opportunity. If a statewide candidate comes to your community for the primary purpose of a photo op, if you take that photo, you'll be hard-pressed to say no to the next one who walks through. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, just think of the precedent. Think of what you've just done there. How do you achieve fairness and consistency? I think that you develop policies, you develop some written policies, some different things. I mean, I hope that tonight's discussion is, not so much a policy, but parameters, thinking through organization, thinking through how you approach these different things and how you can go forward with it. The steps for election coverage, I think, are similar to so many other areas of the coverage in your newspaper. And that's number one, you should develop a policy, then you should implement that policy, and then explain that policy. And again, there's a variety of samples, I believe in my book too, but where you can really use the opportunity election cycle, elections, but everyday coverage, explain to your readers why you do it, and the hows and whys behind it. And I mean, I think it's really true in election coverage, and you can write the same column or the same editorial in every election cycle. You might write that same, you might tackle that same topic 2 or 3 times in the same election season. I mean, some you do year after year, but in the same election season. 2 points that I think you should always have the same person communicate policies to readers. It's all right to acknowledge the difference of opinion. I mean, you're not gonna, everybody in the newsroom or everybody in the newspaper is not gonna agree with maybe how you approach or handle something, but have one person be the liaison in the community, communicate policies within your operation too. That's something we can probably all improve upon. And then be open to feedback and to criticism. Policies should always be subject to review, and you may not get everybody to agree, but your goal is to help them understand your decisions, the hows and whys behind your coverage at every step of the way. We've, I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. We cover a lot of material, and this is probably a tip of what will be covered for your next 6, 7, 8 sessions over the next 2 days. And I caution, don't be overwhelmed. Election coverage just can't be ramped up overnight. And so, go back to your staffs. And again, as I say that, I appreciate when I say go back to your staffs, you're saying, my staff is here, I am it. And so, but look at the things, identify where you can strengthen your coverage. Develop a plan, maybe something, look at 1, 2, or 3 things you take away this weekend and say, let's work on that. And then put the others, the next one is for the next season. Might say, put it on the shelf, but don't forget about it. Go back to it. Keep it in the forefront, and say, when the next election cycle begins, go back from your notes from this weekend and say, what are some things that we can kind of go back and look at and refresh and take steps on? Why should coverage of elections demand so much of your attention? Well, if your typical community newspaper, you devote immense resources to covering the actions of local government, from city councils, school boards, economic development boards, a variety of things. And so I would challenge that why shouldn't you place as much attention and get your community equally engaged in better understanding and selecting the individuals who serve on these boards, who will be making decisions that affect a variety of aspects of your everyday lives. You know, should the school implement, you know, everyday versus half-day kindergarten? Should fees be raised for extracurricular activities? Is it appropriate for city officials to offer tax incentives to a big box retailer on the outskirts of town when your downtown is really suffering? Should the city invest, you know, more in its parks? Should the agency place restrictions on feedlot operations, considering the local economic impact of the livestock industry? Should some pristine woodland area be turned over and opened up for residential development? These and many other issues face your communities on a regular basis, and your readers have a voice in deciding on who makes these decisions. So your newspaper is in the perfect position, again, to give attention to these issues, give attention to the individuals, where they stand on these issues, so you have a good, robust community discussion. You know, I'm ready for the pushback. You can call me a dinosaur and say that newspapers, you know, we place, you know, far too much on public affairs reporting. That's probably back from my heyday. I'll be aging myself a little bit, but you know that today we have to, with a fractured landscape, we have to entertain readers. You know, it should be a fun place to read, fun newspaper to read, and it should be. But also, how much of that, if we say that, you know, readers are not interested in public affairs, I mean, are we kind of coming up short on that? Are we not giving them worthwhile and substantive and a fresh approach to some of that reporting? And hopefully, again, some of that discussion tonight will help us work toward that. I remember two experiences when I was editor at Red Wing, where we really worked hard to make public affairs reporting, election coverage interesting and relevant to readers. Our newspaper, in 1 year, we led an editorial campaign to unseat four incumbents in their re-election bid at the city council. We had news coverage, we wrote columns, we wrote editorials, and we had just an outpouring of fresh voices, fresh faces on our letters column. And all four incumbents were unceremoniously dumped, retired, they were all defeated. Did we do it? I think we kind of caught the wave of the community, the sentiment. But among the most gratifying comments, I had a very good friend of mine who worked at the YMCA, and he said, you know, I used to first run and look at the sports page every day. Now I go to the editorial page. I mean, he had become engaged in a public affairs campaign in the community. And then I had another comment from an advertiser, and this is after we had carried an expose on a local economic development director. And to paraphrase, our ad reps came back, and the advertiser said, let me know when you're going to carry the expose. I want my ad in that day's paper. Now, you know, if you do, that was obviously the circumstances there. It just so happened to be, it was a very riveting story. But, you know, these stories are doable. They take work, however, and I think that's especially challenging in newsrooms operating with diminished resources. And we all have, you know, we all feel that today. These stories will not be accomplished without the support of, frankly, of management willing to invest the time and money to train editors, to train reporters, and without careful planning. And I hope that came through a lot tonight in election coverage. You have to have that planning. But most importantly, these stories, I believe, are essential to the livelihood of community newspapers, and I think essential to what Scott has put together for this weekend of energizing down-home democracy. So I've talked enough. Those are my, I think it does pay dividends. You can enrich community dialogue, you have advertising opportunity, you can strengthen your position, source for news. I'll give my 15-second commercials I do have. You've all received a book of the Votes and Quotes, so I have two other books on bad news, on good judgment, on covering sensitive issues, in a small town newspaper, and a journalism primer. But I get most all these when there's great discussion. It certainly was here tonight, so I thank you all for that. I'll be around through tomorrow night, leaving early Saturday, but I'd be more than happy to follow up with questions and conversation at the reception tonight and throughout tomorrow. Thank you.